Okay, I'm recording. Let's jump in.
Okay.
Where were you born? When were you born? And I'm I was recently in Canada, as you know, and it's such a stereotype that Canadians are nice, but everybody I talked to was so nice. What does it mean to you to be a Canadian?
We're living up to our reputation. Uh-oh.
Yes, yes.
Well, I was born in Canada. I was personally born on the very east coast of Canada in the province of Newfoundland.
Mm,
And so Newfoundland is an island province. The next step from Newfoundland is the Atlantic Ocean. So it's really the very easternmost part of the country. And in fact, I was born on a little island off the coast of Newfoundland, so a tiny little island on the east side of the big island.
mm.
And so pretty much in the ocean with the whales.
And when was this? What month
Uh,
and year?
I was born in June of 1964.
Are
So
you
I'm
a
a
Gemini?
Cancer by astrology, yeah.
Oh, a Cancer. I was born in June. I'm a Gemini.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Well, what did that mean to you to grow up around the ocean? I'm assuming you spent a lot of time in a boat and near the ocean.
Well, interestingly, when I was a baby, my family moved from where I was born. They had lived there all their life for about 8 generations. So they were part of the original Irish immigration to Canada. So it was a fishing community. And my dad was kind of one of the first to get an advanced education. He
Mm,
became a marine engineer.
mm,
And so the whole family moved off to Nova Scotia, which is the next province to Newfoundland, but the first province that's part of the mainland. And so I still grew up on the coast, but in the province of Nova Scotia.
mm.
And so it was really it was a small town. It was a town of about 10,000 people, and but a really nice community. The people in Canada in general are known to be nice, as you say, but
Yeah.
on the East Coast, it's exceptionally so. The people are so heart-based and
Mm,
kind in their nature. So it was a wonderful place to grow up, and living on the ocean was incredible. And I didn't know how powerful that was, I think, until I moved inland. I live in Ontario now, which is more in the central part of the country. And but when you're on the ocean, there's a wonderful tempering of energy that takes place because you're near the water. And so there's a lot of open space. You can go for a walk on the shore and encounter the ocean, and your mind is so open, as I find in that natural environment. And so it has a real calming effect, a real nurturing effect, and a real expansiveness of mind that's natural to being on the water. And so it was a wonderful childhood in lots of ways. I had a fairly sizable family. I had six brothers and sisters, and my parents. So we grew up as a small community in our own little
mm.
house.
What was your birth order?
Yeah, exactly. And
What was
so
your
it was
birth
the
order in the seven siblings? What number were
I
you?
was number six of seven, so I have one younger brother,
Mm.
and then the rest of my siblings are older than I am now. Yeah.
So, did you get treated like the baby that the others wanted to direct and take care of, or were they busy with their own things?
Not so much. I think all of us were fairly independent, and we kind of let each other be their own person in lots of ways. There's a big space between me and my two brothers on either side. There's almost a 5-year gap between my older brother and younger brother. So, in a strange way, I grew up with a lot of space because my older siblings were much closer together. They were all within 2 years of each other. So, they really grew up as a cohort. And I had a little bit more space around me. So, most of my friends and people I hung out with and that kind of stuff were more of my age.
Mm.
So, I had a little bit of a different scenario, I think, than say the older sibs who grew up so close together. They were really each other's best friends and that type
Mm.
of thing.
Were they Irish Catholic, your
Yes,
parents?
yes, yeah.
So you were
Yeah.
raised in the church?
I was, yeah. I was raised, my mom particularly was fairly religious. She was, raised in an environment where the church was a big part of the community, especially when they lived on the island.
Mm.
It was a small community and really religious based in that sense. So everybody was part of the church, and your family evolution, your social functions, everything was really dictated, so to speak, by the order of religion and how things were done in the church and in the community. And so when my parents moved to Nova Scotia, that was a big imprint, if you will, on our upbringing. And but it was religious, but I sometimes will say this. It sounds a little nasty, perhaps, to say, but I would say we were religious, but not crazy religious. So
So you
we were
didn't have the sin and guilt and shame
not
and
so much.
I,
No, I mean, of
Father,
course,
forgive
it's
me, I
part
had
of
a
the
venal thought.
yeah. It's part of the overall gestalt of thinking. I think that religion is, but for the most part, we went to church every week. Prayer was part of our life. This type of thing, but it wasn't the overshadowing influence. There was a whole other aspect of family life that was not strictly religious in any way. So, and but it was more of a community,
Mm-hmm.
and the teachings of religion were a part of our upbringing. It was important to be honest, to have integrity, to be kind, to do good for other people, this type of thing. It was very well indoctrinated in us as young kids, and my parents demonstrated that by their own example because it's really the way they were as people. So
Mm,
I learned more from seeing it than hearing it,
of
like most
course.
people.
But you didn't come away with the sin and guilt and shame that some kids who are raised in Catholic tradition bring
No,
forth.
not quite the same. No, and I've met a lot of people who've had that influence, and the how it's affected them, and almost had to break free, of that thinking later in life. But personally, I didn't have that same struggle. I don't think, or I didn't feel that personally.
And how long did you or still you do you identify yourself as a Catholic?
I think it's sort of in your DNA in a way. Like it's part of my heritage and family going back as far as we're aware. So there's a print of it for sure. But even as a child, I didn't really see myself as religious. I always identified more spiritually as a being. And I had a very open spirituality. I would question things of the church and I would see things that were taught as doctrine but made no sense to me. And I would challenge that kind of thinking,
Mm,
to my parents or to the priests or other
mm,
people around me.
mm.
And so I, even from a young age, I can't say I really ascribe to every belief or detail that the church might teach as the truth. And so my spirituality was always a little bit more open and free. And it was such an innate, natural part that I didn't think much about it. Like as I got older, I didn't really continue going to church myself. And but the system of being a good person and
Mm. The morality.
yeah, the morality and the integrity and all the things that are part of the teachings of truth were an innate part anyway. So they always stayed important, even though the religious aspect of things kind of faded away. I didn't really feel like I fit in as I got older, per se.
What's an example, if you can remember, of something that you challenged to your priest that this doesn't really seem logical to me? How can the church believe whatever?
I think one thing I remember as a young boy going back was marriage, and I kind of, I remember asking the priest why can only men represent God, and why can't a man representing God also have a human counterpart or a wife that they could love and participate with in a family kind of a way in their lives? And, I understood that it was the church had decided along the way that this is how it had to be. And, I think it followed a time of corruption. Like there was a lot of polygamy and abuse and these kinds of things. And the church, in an effort to kind of clamp down on all that, created rules that
Mm.
governed how the ministers of the church would have to be. And, but it's short-sighted. And I think in modern day, we can see that a little more freely, like the shortcomings of that thinking and how it's not necessarily the best for people involved, and how it's very possible to have very human relationships that are based in love and still be an ambassador or an emissary of a greater cause or a spiritual purpose, if you will.
I'm really eager to talk to a sister because I think it's so interesting that they think of themselves as being married to Jesus. So
Yeah.
that's another interesting tact on marriage. But I don't think priests are married to anyone, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure of the answer to that question. I know it is true for many of the sisters. In their vows, they are married, to the church or to Christ,
Yeah.
and that really is their vocation. Yeah.
And they wear
So,
wedding rings. But priests don't wear wedding rings, do they?
no, I don't
Yeah.
think so. I
They're
don't
not
think so.
they don't get married. They could there's Virgin Mary, but I guess that's too corporal or something. It's too body based. So when did you decide that you wanted to be a physician? What led you in that path?
A physician. So for me, I think I always knew I wanted to be a doctor or involved in healing in some capacity. And, I remember as a little boy, my father worked on the marine ferries that would go between the two island provinces. So these are big ferries, like the size of a cruise ship, if you will. And he ran the engine room and all that type of stuff. But as kids, we would sometimes go for a crossing, just to spend a day with dad and to be on the boat. And I would love to go up to the bridge where the captain was and the wheelhouse and all that kind of stuff. So I got to meet a lot of the crew, the officers. And I remember as a little boy, the captain one day kind of said to me, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, well, I want to be a doctor. And I think I was maybe 4 or 5 years old at the most at the time. And it's funny because I didn't think too much about it, but I remember when he asked me the question and I gave him the answer, it was the truth. Like it was so fundamentally innate that the answer just kind of popped out as the way it is. And I never really looked back. I think from that time forward, I just always imagined that that's what I would do. And then so my interest in that continued, both from a scientific perspective, but also from the humanities perspective. I found, I met some really wonderful physicians when I was a kid, and they were such a big part of the community. And people really respected them, for what they brought and what they did in the community. And I could connect to that so readily. And it just kind of, added fuel to the fire, so to speak. It kind of impassioned my interest, and then it kind of went from there. So I went through sciences and into medicine as a young man. I started when I was in my very early 20s, 20 years old, in fact.
Yeah, as a physician?
Yeah.
How did
Yeah.
you manage that?
Well, I was a little young through school, and I finished high school when I was 17. And so in Canada, the way medicine is done is you do a science degree. And so I did a 3-year degree, bachelor's degree in biology and sciences, and then applied to medical school. So I started when I guess I was 20 or 21 probably by the time I started actual medical school.
Wow. In terms of any belief in past lives, you were so certain at 4. Do you think there's any past life roots in your desire to be a physician?
Yeah, I mean, today for sure I do. At the time, I didn't think much about that stuff. In fact, when I grew up, I was really focused on school and life and, all the things that young people are interested in. And I just kind of wanted to make my way through my education and all that kind of stuff. And I didn't think a lot about spiritual things or esoteric things until I got into my 20s. And a lot of it was triggered when I lost my dad, actually. He died when I was at the end of medical school. And I had some experiences where I became aware of a transpersonal reality. Like I knew he lived past his death. I knew, he gave these very special signs to my mother, at the funeral, and all kinds of bizarre things started to happen. And it was the first time I had ever encountered anything like that in my own personal life. And it triggered me to start to ask lots of questions. And it was a very big part of my own spiritual opening, really, to be honest. And, that was when I started to want to know more. And around that time, I began to live what is termed today a Kundalini awakening. I began to have all these energy movements and strange out of body experiences and, all kinds of unusual things. And I didn't know what I was living at the time. And it was right at the end of my medical studies. It was around 1987, 1988. And because I didn't know what I was happening, but yet I had a background of being, raised in a sort of religious environment, but also a scientific environment. And I knew that what I was living was outside of the parameters that anything that could be explained by either of those systems of thinking. And so I didn't really know what was happening to me. And I began to search. And really what happened in retrospect is I was catalyzed, if you will, into a process of experiencing things I didn't understand, which led me on a spiritual quest. And this was revolutionary, in my thinking at the time. And it led me to lots of experiences that taught me about the reality of energy and the power of consciousness and the nature of consciousness-based healing and energy-based healing and so on and so forth. And but what I really learned through that part of my journey was how we are guided and how we are led when our spirit is open or purposely learning something. And so I lived a whole bunch of synchronicities and intuitive experiences that kind of led me on a path that brought me to answers that I could never have found with my rational or logical mind. And so I learned to trust my intuition a great deal and to experience synchronicities that came when I trusted my intuition and followed it, powerfully. And so, as much as I've been taught scientific method and, the ways of medicine, here I was having this whole other education on the side, if you will, about a very esoteric way of life. And so the two just kind of merged together over time.
What are some examples of your father's contact with your family after he crossed over? What did you do to say, hi?
Yeah.
I'm here.
So what happened actually was when my mom and my dad were very close, and my father was ill for almost a year before he passed. And I woke up one night about a week before he passed, and I had this very strong intuition that he was going to be leaving the next week on Friday. And so the next morning I get up, and I was an intern at the time, and I got up and I went to work, and I admitted 3 patients that day and through call overnight who had the same medical diagnosis as my father. And so I had this intuition he was going to be leaving, and I'm encountering all these patients with the same medical state as my father, and I'm presenting these patients at rounds, the next morning to the team, and I literally burst into tears. And, I can't really hold it together emotionally. And so I hadn't said much at work at that point, but the senior physician took me aside and had a little chat, and I explained to her what was happening. She was an incredible woman. And she said, John, it's just time you go home. It's time for you to be with your family. And so she said, don't worry about things here. We will take care of everybody and everything. This is not a time for you to be worried. It's a time for you to be present with the people you love. And it was an incredible gift of consciousness, to experience that and to be treated that way in the moment. And so I went home, and my whole family came home, and we were all there with my dad when he passed. And sure enough, the next Friday was the day he left. And so the night before, we had stayed with him, and he was taking his last breaths and the morning, but the whole family had come to be around him, and it was a really powerful moment in my life. And I had seen people pass before, but I had never seen someone so close to my heart pass before.
Right.
And my mom was there, and she became kind of obsessed with this idea that it had to rain on Monday, which would be the day that he was going to have his funeral and to be buried. And my mom wasn't really superstitious or anything, but I kind of thought, well, this is interesting. And so, but it became such a powerful thing that it overtook the entire time of my father's wake. And so my family was actually getting worried about my mother, because I thought, she's losing her mind here. And, we didn't really understand what was happening. And so finally I kind of took her aside and I said, Mom, what's going on? You have to talk to me. Like, this is too much. And she said, well, John, she said, I just always believed that if it rained on the day that you are interred, it's a sign that the soul has passed in peace.
Oh.
And so then I understood the scenario, like why it became so powerful and important to her. She just wanted to know that Dad was at peace. And so then when Monday came, it was a beautiful sunny day. It was in the month of July, and there was no sign of rain. And I kind of thought, oh my heavens, like, if it doesn't rain today, my mother's going to spend the next 10 years or 20 years of her life in agony, thinking that Dad is
Worry.
not at peace for some reason. So we go to the cemetery, and the priest was there, and he did his prayers, and he said the last amen, and out of the sky, I
Yay!
kid you not, came three massive raindrops, the
That's
size
great.
of a golf ball. And they splattered on his coffin in the cemetery. And it was like a straight line, ping the head, ping his belly, and ping at the toes. And it was almost like they baptized us. Like there was so much, the raindrops were so huge that we got splashed. And so we're all standing there
But they
in
didn't come other places. They were just on your father's body.
exactly
Oh, wow.
three big raindrops, three massive
Wow.
golf ball sized raindrops, and they landed right on him. And so I was there watching, and I could see my mother, who was at the end of my father's casket, and it was like someone turned a vacuum on in her chest, and she just kept breathing in like, and it kept going and going, and I thought, oh my God, she's going to burst. And then all of a sudden, she went,
Oh, how wonderful.
and I literally saw peace descend on her.
Yes.
And it was a really powerful moment because you can't make something like that up. It's so divinely orchestrated. And I remember watching it, and my brothers and sisters were all witness to this too. We're all looking at this, and we're thinking, this is a miracle. And I thought, I don't know if there's a God, I don't know if it's my father, I don't know what just happened here, but boy, there's some spiritual force that's really a part of our reality. And, it knows when to intervene and to be there in a way that can heal. And so it's amazing when you live. We've all had different kinds of moments like this, I think. But when they happen, they're so perfectly tailor-made to teach you things.
Mm.
And so as I bore witness to this, I
Mm.
literally saw the power of peace to heal. I saw the power of faith to create. I saw the power of love to manifest,
Yes.
and so on and so forth. So there were so many lessons all tied up into one experience. It began for me, it was a catalyst moment. Like it's one of those moments you can't quite be the same. And so I began to ask really serious questions like, what do I believe about the universe? What do I believe about spirituality? What do I believe about life? And so it catapulted me into a whole search for a more personal spirituality, because by this point I had kind of left behind a lot of strict beliefs in religious thinking, but I hadn't really found or carved out a new path of spirituality that felt aligned with who I was. And but this was one of those apex moments that, changes everything forever.
You were around
And then
23 or so when your dad
I
passed?
would have been 24 at this time when he passed, yeah. And prior to this happening was when I started having these Kundalini
Oh, you
experiences
had it
too.
before.
And so it all kind of coalesced into a time frame that, made me ask lots and lots of questions and begin a search. And then as I lived this Kundalini experience, I sometimes will say to people, I knew I was living something profound and powerful. I had no idea what I was living. I had never heard of the word Kundalini, and I wasn't really familiar with the human energy system and the things that I am today. And but because I was raised in, like I said, a religious environment as well as a scientific environment, I knew that I couldn't turn to either one of these venues for answers. So what happened was one day I had this incredible intuition to go to a bookstore in the town where I lived. And I woke up with this thought in my head, but it was really powerful. It was like one of these things I almost felt like I was being commanded to do from
It's a
inside of
compulsion.
myself.
Yeah, you're compelled.
Compelled, if you will. Yeah. So anyway, it was a holistic healing, like a new age kind of a bookstore, and they had books on all kinds of things: esoteric healing, Eastern spirituality, uh, different systems of spiritual belief, and so on and so forth. And so I walked into the store, and it was kind of like an old house with lots of rooms, and every room had books in it. And I remember feeling remarkably overwhelmed. Like I just kind of looked around and I thought, how am I ever going to find what I need in this place? And as my eyes panned across the bookstore, today we're really familiar with computers. So you know how when your mouse will scroll over an icon, the icon will get big and then it will shrink again. Well, as my eyes panned over the book, there was a book on the bookshelf that did that. It got big as my eyes crossed over it, and I gave my head a shake and I did it again, and sure enough, it got big. And I went over and picked the book up off the shelf, and the book was called The Spontaneous Awakening of Kundalini by Gopi Krishna. And so I was overwhelmed because I was reading the back cover and a little bit about what was contained in the book. And I thought, oh my word, this is exactly what's happening to me right now. Like I could recognize so many of the experiences as what I was living. Like I would have these moments where I would pop out of my body and in full consciousness see my body, and the roof would disappear from the house and I could see the sky, and I could travel in my energy body outside my body in full consciousness, and all these kinds of unusual things. And but as I read the book, it brought me a lot of comfort because I thought, oh, this is actually a real phenomenon. It's been mapped, somebody's lived it, somebody's explained it. And then so it brought me to some of those resources, because back in the day, like in modern day, there's a lot of information about all these kinds of things because so many people have lived these kinds of awakenings. But back in the day, there wasn't very much available. So to find a book like a needle in a haystack, and for it to be precisely the book that I needed for my own understanding, was an incredible synchronicity.
Yes.
And it was a synchronicity that followed a powerful intuition. So again, you can kind of see how the details of the event, they're bigger than just the moment. I mean, it brought me a resource I needed, but it also taught me a way of life.
Do you think that you have spiritual guides, that have some kind of form that help make this happen? Or is it just an intention that's vibrational that attract you to go to the bookstore and find the book?
I believe that we do have guides, but I think it's hard for us to conceptualize what they really are. Like, I think a lot of the wisdom that flows through us is innate to our own higher self nature. So, as we open to greater aspects of consciousness and more of our own multidimensional or quantum reality, there's a lot of wisdom we all carry in our soul fabric that's innate to who we are as an experiential being. So some of the guidance is really from our higher self. Really, we are our own guide in that way, but we're also part of a system. And so, like on the earth, if you need to fix a pipe, you don't do it necessarily. You call a plumber. Or if you need wires, fixed properly, you'll call an electrician, and you'll rely on people who have other areas of expertise to help make something balanced and whole. And our guidance system, I think, is like that. We'll bring in attributes of consciousness that are strong, in other souls or other teachers, and they will be part of our energy makeup as we journey forward through our own evolution of understanding and development.
And these are helpers in bodies and in interdimensional bodies, both.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you think about synchronicity for a minute, like if you just pause and think, well, how do we create synchronicity?
Yes.
So we may have an intention, we put out a strong intention to do something or to create something or experience something, and we don't know the way. We just know what the intention is, but we don't know how we're going to make it happen. And we don't know the person we're going to need to speak to, or the things that need to come together or coalesce at a point in time to make it possible for that to happen.
Right.
And so we're relying on a big system for that to happen. And so it's almost like we're here living in our mind, but above us, there's a whole plane of consciousness where all of this is being worked out.
Yes.
And so, when you think about that, that's how it has to be if synchronicities are true, because on a level of spirit and consciousness, we know what we need, but in a 3D way, we don't always know. And so we're led to these discoveries or these synchronistic moments, as part of a greater plan or system of consciousness.
Could you define Kundalini, what it actually is for people who don't know?
Yeah, so as you evolve in your own energy, being in both consciousness and energy, there's an awakening that tends to happen in the body and in the mind. And so Kundalini is, you can think of it as a spiritual energy. It's part of who you are, but it's kind of dormant. And so people in Eastern traditions will describe it as dormant and coiled up at the base of the spine. And as you go through your own awakening, this energy starts to expand and to move through your physical body, but also through all of the bodies, the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual bodies that are part of us as an energy being. And it begins to open us up in consciousness and in energy so that we can integrate more of our own spiritual essence, if you will, or our soul, depending on the language that people like to use. And so it's an energetic expansion. And so energy and consciousness go hand in hand. Consciousness kind of governs energy and is a type of energy, really. And so as we expand in consciousness and energy, there's an opening that happens in our system. So when Kundalini is awakening, it's almost like our energy system is being stretched and remodeled, if you will, so that we can carry more energy within our body.
So Kundalini is kind of a form of chi. It's a subtle energy, as Einstein called it.
Yeah, it is, and it's expanded to the normal 3D state, in the sense that a lot of people who've experienced Kundalini awakening have spent lots of time meditating or doing spiritual practices. But today, in modern times, a lot of people will experience it rather spontaneously. And they're not necessarily yogis or gurus, they're not walking around in a spiritual lineage that they recognize as such. But I believe part of what's happening right now on the planet is a lot of people who've had these experiences previously are being born and living very normal lives, if you will. And this is kind of happening spontaneously. So, there are a lot of people who, are spiritually inclined or have wisdom or insight. And so part of their own journey is to have this movement or this awakening. And some people live it all at once, like a really powerful kaboom, and other people live it in slow, incremental doses, if you will, like little waves. And,
but
your soul...
think they're going crazy. So if it's too extreme, it can be really, really difficult.
Yeah, and there are lots and lots of examples of that. People who were overwhelmed by the experience and it kind of knocked them so off balance for years of their life, right, where they had no orientation or understanding of, how they could function or cope. So it can be offsetting if it's not understood or kind of nursed or nurtured in a healthy way.
For you, were the triggers for the Kundalini meditation or going to sleep, or you mentioned a retreat center you were in the States? Is there some kind of environment that evokes this awakening?
Not that I'm aware of for me. It started to happen for me when I started to ask questions. So I lived an experience when I was in medical school one day where a professor was talking and he was explaining what's called a healing cascade. And this is basically all the biochemical things that happen when you cut yourself and what happens in the body to respond to that, to stop the bleeding and to then to begin to knit the cells together and create, a scar and then eventually a tighter closure in the skin and so on and so forth. But as he's explaining all of this very complex biochemistry, all I'm thinking is, but how does the body know how to do this? Like, where is the intelligence that knows how to govern all of these things?
The DNA, right?
Yeah, and so I'm sitting there and I just kept asking, and all of a sudden I went into this really strange altered state. And the only way I can explain it is it was like I went into the field of healing. And I understood from that space that there's an intelligence that knows how to direct the body and how to direct life in different ways. And so it was almost like I merged with that field of energy or information for a minute. And it was an incredible experience because I could feel the love and I could feel the expansiveness in that state. And then I kind of came back down to myself, and I was not really a meditator or anything like that, but this experience kind of just unfolded. And I thought, gosh, that must be what it's like when people meditate or something. Like that must be how it feels, like you go into this bigger field. So you can kind of see how little things were happening, and yet I didn't consciously do them. They were kind of unfolding in their own way. And, for me, I think it was on the level of my soul, I knew it was all appropriate and okay. But on the level of my very human being, I wasn't quite sure what I was living or doing.
Well,
And so
was the answer to your question DNA, or what is the intelligence that helps us heal or whatever?
well, it is in the DNA, but the DNA is part of an even fuller system. So within everything that exists in form, there's etheric information that governs its presence on the planet.
The template,
So
can we say?
yes. Yeah, so part of having a human body, for example, the body has an intelligence coded in it that knows how to make it and heal it and so on and so forth. And then our DNA, of course, interfaces with that. So it's not only the DNA, the body also has an intelligence in it. Or if you think about life, for example, every species that exists on the planet has an etheric grid of consciousness. And so they're part of that. But then as human beings, because we have this divine DNA that we can talk about, we merge with nature, we merge with the nature of the body, and then that DNA can create things and help the body in different ways because it's so powerfully conscious.
Is that intelligence more than the soul or the spirit that exists before we're born?
It's part of it.
It's part of
So later in life, I began to just to kind of tie it together a little bit from where we were to answer this question. There's a few things that I would say. So what I as I went through all of this, Gail, what I became interested in was energy and consciousness as a force of healing. And so I began to have experiences where I would see energy, I'd see auras, or I'd see energy fields in nature. And so because of my own experiences, I knew when people talked about things like auras and chakras and all this kind of stuff, that they weren't making it up. And as a scientist, I'm also very logical and rational, and in my scientific thinking, that's how everything is. You have to be that way. And so as I lived these experiences, I thought, well, I know when people say these things, they're true. And, I had lived things that took away my own personal doubt, but that doesn't prove it to anybody else. It's because you live it yourself doesn't mean other people have to believe what you experience or what have you. So, but it was enough to take away my own doubt. And so I learned a lot about energy healing, and through a bunch of synchronicities, I met people who taught me all kinds of things about the energy body and the power of consciousness and so on and so forth. And I began to understand how all the spiritual systems and healing tie together. And so how spiritual wisdom is part of the healing fabric of humanity and so on and so forth. And then later in life, I began to have more visionary type experiences. So I would have these experiences often in a meditation, usually in a very powerful part of the planet and with a very big group of conscious people or people who were interested in healing and so on. And so I would have these experiences where I would be shown things about, DNA or quantum DNA or this type of stuff. And through a series of visions I lived, it taught me a lot about that and how this is an evocative part of healing, how it's something that's part of what is available to human beings to heal. But it ties into a whole other story that people term the ascension. And so what's happening right now on the planet is the Earth is in the process of birthing a whole new consciousness. And so human beings are being catalyzed into what you might call a higher consciousness civilization or an ascended civilization. And so if you think about the term ascended civilization, the easiest way to conceptualize that is a civilization that understands the principles of spiritual truth. And they can operate at a functional level where that is how things get done. So people understand oneness, for example. You understand all the things that spiritual gurus have taught all through time, like the way you treat another human being has energy consequences, both on them and on you. So you have to learn to unravel your mistakes through forgiveness and through compassion and so on and so forth. And that you have to learn, for example, to be in the world but not of the world, meaning you have to learn to exist in a 3D reality, but the things that govern the way you live in that reality are from another dimension, if you will, or another plane of consciousness. And so that's, tied up in the Christ teachings and also in Buddhist teachings, that you have to learn to operate in the world, but you don't necessarily function the way most people do in the world. You have to find a different way of being in the world. And so they taught us what this looked like. They taught it was to be loving. It was to love your neighbor as yourself. It was to be kind to each other. It was to be merciful. It was to be generous. It was to be honest. It was to have integrity, and so on and so forth. So you can imagine as humanity kind of integrates these principles into themselves, and enough people do, the whole world is kind of moving forward into a higher plane of reality, or a higher plane of consciousness. And so this time on the planet has been timed for a massive transformation of this nature. And so there's a whole energy system that can only really be understood in galactic terms. You can't really limit it to Earth terms or our solar system even. You have to think a little bit bigger. And what's happening is the Earth is going through a time cycle. And so the Mayans touched this in their teachings on time, and the date of December 2012, December 21, 2012 was earmarked as the end times. People were dramatically calling it the end times. But really what it is the end of a time cycle. And so the end of any cycle is a new beginning, right? Like spring flows into summer, summer flows into fall. As one cycle ends, another cycle begins. 6,000-year time cycle that's ending in 2012 or ended in 2012. And we're beginning a whole new cycle of time that will go into the next cycle of humanity. And so you can imagine that the foundation of that new time cycle is different than the last one. And so slowly the energy of the earth and the energy of human consciousness is transitioning into this new kind of an energy reality. And although if you look at the news and you look at the world around us, of course, it seems like that's all just wishful thinking, or it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But everything that's in the old energy system has to transition into the new. So things that don't vibrationally match where we're going are going to have to disintegrate. And things that are willing to align with the transition will transform. So they'll go into, a different kind of a system. So anything that's part of corruption, for example, or dishonesty or disintegrity, either in business or health and healing and all this kind of stuff, it's all going to be challenged as we move into this new time cycle. So when you look at the world, it's not hard to see how that's really happening today. Like there's chaos in all the systems, and a lot of it is about identifying problems so that we can actually begin the process of healing and reintegrating things in a new way.
Yeah, the way I think of it, it's like a Jungian shadow coming up to light to be revealed and cleaned out. It's the shadow emerging.
Exactly. And it's both metaphoric and actual in a way. It really is what's happening. And it's happening on a big scale in terms of social systems and structure and all that kind of stuff. But more importantly, it's happening on a personal level. So people are living their own transformation. And so we're all going through, experiences and cycles of experience that help us to let go of outmolded ways of thinking and feeling and being, and open up to new ways of thinking and feeling and being that are part of this new energy. So people index that as the ascension process. And so people will talk about that as a phenomenon. You know, there's an energetic and a consciousness transformation that's happening. And so human beings are being propelled through this. And so we're awakening to all kinds of knowledge and information that wasn't really available to us 50 years ago or 100 years ago, unless you were part of some special spiritual teaching or a mystery school or something like that. And but you know, these things are becoming common knowledge, and people are talking about energy, and they're talking about consciousness, and they're talking about their chakras, and everybody's doing yoga and so on and so forth.
Some people talk about ascension as wanting to leave the body, but it sounds like you're talking about ascension as changing the social, cultural, the physical way that people live in this body on this earth.
Absolutely. And in fact, as much as it's an ascension really applies to consciousness and vibration. In other words, it's a higher vibrational reality. So the base level at which reality experiences itself is higher. So it's an ascended state of vibrational energy. But really what it is an integration of higher vibrational energy and consciousness. So as much as it's an ascension, it's a descension. It's your soul coming down more fully into your body and consciousness becoming more clear in your energy system so that you understand your multidimensional nature and that we're part of a collective system of life, and that humanity is a family. You know, these things we've talked about spiritually for eons now, where, you know, the human family is one family, and that human beings are conscious creators, and that we have a powerful force of consciousness that we can use to create and to heal things, and so on and so forth. And we remember multidimensional experiences. We become aware that we've lived other lifetimes, for example. And so if you've lived another lifetime, but you're aware of that lifetime in this body, it means you're aware of two experiences at the same time. So you're aware of yourself in this dimensional experience, but you're also aware of yourself in another time point. And so, you know, that's two places at once. So really that, in essence, is a multi-dimensional experience. And so we begin to understand that that is the way we are as spiritual beings, that we have that nature, if you will, and that what's happening as we integrate the consciousness and energy within our body and in our system is we're becoming aware of those things. And it's bringing to us a healing in the sense that as we open up to the energy of memories of other lifetimes, sometimes there's a healing that takes place in that opening, like you have to go through the fear or the energy or the emotions that may have been part of your death or the experience of that other lifetime. But what really happens as you clear through those energies is you become innately aware that you do not die and that you are here on purpose. Your presence right now is a really important incarnation, and that we're here by divine design, if you will. And that because we don't die, we learn to live a little bit more fearlessly and more openly. And so there's a courage that comes to be part of you that's with that. And then the wisdom of all these other lifetimes is also available to you because, you know, not only have you lived other lifetimes, but they're lifetimes where you knew things and did things in different ways than you may do in your life today. So as you open up to this bigger you see that you have gifts and abilities and talents that may not be part of something that you thought was you when you were before that, if you will, you know, like limited to your prior version of yourself.
But in the meantime, we're destroying the planet. So the question is, how long does this ascension take in terms of the rapid pace at which we're, you know, destroying our life forms?
Right. So because we're at the end of a cycle, we're at the end of the consciousness of that cycle. And so much about the last cycle was naive in the sense that humanity didn't really understand its integration to the planet, for example. So, for example, human beings lived like they were on the earth, but not part of the earth. And so you could do things to the earth that wouldn't have an effect on you. But now, as we become more conscious, we realize there's a beautiful indigenous saying that says we all live downstream, for example. And so what if we poison the water, it affects people. And so you can't poison the water and not be affected by it. So there's a consciousness that awakens. And so many people are feeling that way and knowing these things, that a really big part of humanity is pushing to change the way we do things. And so we see this in political system and in social systems. There's a lot of people who know we have to change the way we do things environmentally and so on and so forth. On the flip side, as we move into the new energy, we're going to be given the ability to do things that we can't really do yet in the new energy system. And so, for example, we talk about free energy. And so imagine if we had the technology to derive energy for a community or a town or a home that came innately out of the environment without having to burn coal or burn wood or so on and so forth.
People say they've invented those and they end up with men in the black suits carrying them off because they don't want to disrupt the capitalist economic system.
Absolutely correct. And in the old energy, that could happen, and it would happen. And there's lots of stories about that, and we all know that that's true. But in the new energy, all that stuff becomes a lot harder to do. So because of, for example, technology, it's like a two-edged sword. It has good attributes and bad attributes. But because of technology, if you have an idea, you can spread it around the world in a second. And 100 years ago, you couldn't do that.
Right.
If you had information, you'd have it written down in a book. You'd have to keep it under lock and key. And if someone got you and killed you, they would take your safe and burn it. And then that would be the end of the information. But now it's on a chip, and you can give it to your 5 best friends and 10 best friends. You can publish it on Facebook or wherever you want. So because of the system of energy and information transfer that's part of reality now, it gets a lot harder for those things to be concealed in the same way. So what we'll see is, and this isn't happening overnight, it's happening over a bit of time, but you'll see that there will be people that come forth and they have knowledge. Their soul's purpose is to really come and deliver this information for humanity, and they will do it, and they'll do it very effectively. And so a lot of things that seem futuristic or even almost impossible to the everyday person today will become as innate as a banking machine or the internet or a Wi-Fi zone, or the things that are so common to us today that were incomprehensible 25 or 30 years ago.
You're still practicing medicine, correct?
I am, yeah.
Do you use your ability to see energy fields and intuition to help you? Because you're a radiologist, right?
Right, I am, yeah. So radiology is an interesting part of medicine that I find myself in, because of all things in medicine, radiology is really energy. We use energy to see the body, to see inside the body, and to interface with health. And so it's kind of funny that I find myself doing that given the rest of my story, but I guess it all makes sense when you think about it. But the way I use it a lot in medicine is more in the way I practice medicine. So for example, reading imagery, for example, if you read a CT or an MRI scan, you're looking for illness, or you're looking for changes in an illness because of treatment and so on, or someone's been in a trauma and you're trying to find life-threatening injuries and so on and so forth. And so a lot of it is visual skill and being able to recognize the abnormalities. But on a level that I'm very aware of, intuition guides that process a lot. And often before I close a case or I finish reading a scan, I'll just close my eyes and ask, is there anything else I need to see? And if I feel that there really is something else, like after I've done due diligence to my visual work, I'll ask my intuition if I've missed anything or if I need to go back. And when I do, sometimes I get a hit. Yeah, look again. And I'll go back and I'll look, and I will see something that I didn't see the first time, or find something. And the other thing that you can do is you can wish goodness and love on anybody. So as I'm looking at imaging and I see people who are living in you through very difficult experiences of illness and things. There's a tremendous compassion that's part of my relationship with that. And I realize I'm not looking at images, I'm looking at a human being. And so when I relate to the images in my work, that's very present in my mind and my heart. So it's kind of how I am with the work I do. And sometimes I'll be really compelled to just stop and offer a prayer or a healing intention as I'm going through the work that I do.
Beautiful.
So,
what about your own personal shadow? What have been the most difficult points in your life, and how did you cope? I think people need to know how people with gifts like you have, that they also have challenges. And
oh my gosh, yeah. So, I mean, when you look at anything retrospectively and you've integrated it to a certain level of understanding, it all sounds rosy. Like we can package it up in a way that that sounds just all amazing. But a lot of the things I lived were very, very challenging and difficult. So, like, for example, when I started to live through this Kundalini awakening experience, I was scared. I had no idea what I was living. I knew it wasn't anything I had encountered
you probably thought you were going crazy.
Yeah, and so those questions surface. It's like, is there something wrong with me? Do I have a brain tumor? Am I psychotic? All these things. And so there are a lot of fears that would surface, and I'd have to walk through the fears. And then, of course, there's the social stigma. A lot of my beliefs and experiences are very unorthodox, and they're not part of most people's journey at this point. So if you share them with people, they can't help but judge because they don't really have any personal frame of reference. And most people are open-minded and they're curious and what have you, but not everybody. And some people are very quick to judge, or they dismiss it, and they can be very harsh and lack any kind of understanding. So when you put yourself out there with people in an open and honest way, you experience a lot of that kind of stuff. And then the other thing is, through the journey, you encounter little bits and pieces of your own ego and your own personality that you have to integrate. Like, where do you worry? What do you do to create anxiety? Where do you judge other people? Are you capable of being hurt by someone you love and forgiving them? All these kinds of things. So they're very human in a way, but they're also very spiritual in a way, because you realize they're part of the overall ascension process that we have to go through, or we choose to go through, I should say. And so, there are lots of anecdotal experiences in my life where, I had to encounter all of these things and integrate them. And that work never ends. I mean, I still see things that make me concerned or afraid, or, I'll find myself judging something or being dismissive of something. But as you grow and you become more conscious, it's pretty quick. You see what's happening. Like you're aware of it more quickly. And so you stop yourself and you say, okay, so what's going on here? And I try to do that work in real time, as I see and live things and experience them. And then, if there's anything I'm missing, life has a magical way of making sure you don't.
Right. Some people talk about physician attitude, that in med school, physicians are kind of trained to be authoritarian, the gods in the white coats who should be obeyed, absolutely. But you don't seem to have succumbed to any of the physician attitude.
And to be honest, a lot of physicians are not like that. Like, I think in the old system of medicine, like if we go back through, the 16, 17, 1800s, and you see medicine in its modern form come into being, physicians were a cloistered part of society. They were kind of revered. It was mostly men until the last century. And so there was a certain male energy about the whole medical experience. It was kind of male dominated, and it was man think, if you will. But it was also reflective of the culture at the time. Like, society has this funny way of turning on itself and judging things that were innately part of the cultural fabric. So, for example, in a society that tolerates racism, when you look backwards, you'll see examples of racism. if you have a culture of human beings who like to be disempowered and to give their authority to other people, you will see examples of that through both spirituality and through medicine. So the old system of spirituality, the old system of religion was very much like that. So you didn't see yourself as an integrated spiritual being. You kind of saw yourself as someone who was less than, or, unworthy in certain ways, or, less than a full human being. And there were other people who were better than you and smarter than you and more important than you and all this kind of stuff. So we kind of look to physicians for that. So in a strange way, it's this mixture of someone really trying to do good and to be noble and to help another human being. And then all of this other stuff is put upon them, from the way that we are as human beings. And so, the whole system was set up to, in the end, to become what it became. Like, it was really a whole soup of all those things that created that. And then, but it's come to a reckoning, like in the 20th century, now the 21st century, that frame of consciousness doesn't work. And it doesn't work anywhere, and it certainly doesn't work in healing systems and health and healing. So a lot of change has been driven by patients who say, I don't like this. I don't want it to be this way. And so they stand up and they say, it has to be better. I need more respect. I need to be a participant in this story. I need to make decisions that are self-appropriate and so on. And medicine has adapted.
And they research on the internet and say, I read that blah, blah, blah. What do you think about blah, blah, blah?
Exactly, yeah. And that can be, as a physician, that's a blessing and a curse, because a lot of people come with a lot of misinformation.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you're spending your whole time trying to disentangle what's not true versus what you know to be true, and so on and so forth. And meanwhile, through the journey of all that, the thing that's most important is you want to honor the soul or the spirit of the person you're talking to. So it can be very, very challenging to have some of those conversations. But I think people are more self-responsible in lots of ways, and they're more engaged in their own life in lots of ways, and so that's reflected in healthcare. And then the other, just quickly, I'd say also, the other thing I see happening is as slowly as we move into this new energy, children are changing. So if you look at children today, and you look at children, a generation ago or two generations ago, sometimes you shake your head and say it's not even the same species. Like, these kids are so different. And so when you look at them, there's a lot of things about them that we misunderstand, and people find them entitled and disinterested and so on and so forth. But if you have a bit of a broader frame of thinking, you realize they're just not interested in things that don't need to take time or are not real or don't have integrity. And they have an innate sense of worth. So when you're talking to them, if you speak to them in a way that honors them, even if they don't know something or don't know an answer, if you treat them with respect, they respect you. But the moment that you belittle them or judge them or condemn them, you see very quickly they just drop an axe. They have no interest in participating with you. And so there's a lot of conflict, because in the old energy, that's how kids were all dealt with. You were told what to do, you were quiet in the corner, you're not supposed to talk unless you're asked a question, and so on and so forth. And so, but kids today, you can't make them be that way. And so it's a rebelliousness that on the surface, but the truth is it's a changing human nature. And so this is also reflected in the younger generation of physicians. And I teach a lot, and I see an incredible open-mindedness in the younger physicians. And, when you kind of recognize what it is and what you're looking at, it's actually kind of magical to see. They're very open thinking. They're not judgmental the way people were, let alone physicians were, 2 or 3 generations ago. And so you kind of see a breath of fresh air coming into the profession as well. So.
I've been doing research on global youth attitudes and have a series of books about it. And I think what you say is absolutely true globally, that they're much more egalitarian and accepting and not willing to put up with corruption and lies and pretenses.
Right. And to have a balance in their life and reality, like, money is not the most important thing to them. No. Well-being is, and so on. And so a whole frame of reference is very different from what we're leaving behind.
So we hope that they vote.
Yes.
Please vote. What I was going to say about medicine that's so interesting to me is traditionally placebo effect has been dismissed. Oh, it's just placebo, but it's huge. It's 40-50% sometime. Let's
Yeah.
focus in on what happens in placebo effect, that it has the same effect as a pharmaceutical. Are you
Right.
hearing more discussion of mind body interaction?
Yeah, and this example gets referenced a lot, but it's really powerful what you're saying, Gail, because when a new medication is to be tested, for example, to see if it's effective for treatment of a certain condition, it has to be more effective than placebo.
Yeah.
And so, in other words, what we're saying is 40% of people are going to get over this illness without any drug. And so, for the drug to even be considered effective, it has to do better than that. And so you're right. We're always looking at that as the frame of reference to make, to describe something as powerful in a certain way or be able to be effective in a certain way. But the question is, what drives 40% of people to be effective healers in their own right?
Right.
Is an amazing question. And so, in all the new advances in neuroplasticity and mind body medicine and longevity studies and all these kinds of things that are integrating and weaving their way into medical studies now, um, we're starting to look at that question, whether we realize it or not. It's kind of happening vicariously as that happens. And so, science is very cognizant today of frames of reality that support health and well-being and frames that don't. So, if you're under constant stress and constant anxiety and so on, it has a toll on our immune system and on our nervous system and on our ability to heal and be well. And then also our adaptability to these stresses and how we handle them is another factor or element. And there's a whole branch of science opening up called epigenetics.
Yeah.
And, Bruce Lipton and people like that are doing a lot of research, and they demonstrate how certain things within our genetics are more likely to express in a certain environment.
Yeah.
So it's not about whether you have the gene, it's about whether you have a gene in an environment. And so we're starting to blend together an understanding of how psychology and physical health and healing all tie together. And that'll become a much bigger part of medicine in the future for sure.
Right. Well, let's talk about your book. What does the missing pill focus on? What happens in that book that we haven't talked about?
Sure. So the nidus or the inspiration for the book came to me because when I would be talking to people about healing or the potential to heal through energy and consciousness, I always found myself unable to say, read this book or read that book. I would have to recommend 15 books and tell them to ignore certain parts of a book because I didn't really buy into this way of thinking, but the rest of the book is great, and so on and so forth. So it was such a broad answer that I was really unsatisfied with it. And I thought, we don't have a book that brings together everything we need to understand about where we are in medicine, where we are in energy and consciousness-based healing, and that can bring the information to a person in a really sit down and read one book kind of way about what you have in you as a power to heal and transform. And then how all of this ties into all the things that are part of this new energy paradigm. We talk about how the spiritual part of our life ties into it, or crystal healing, or vibrational healing, or Reiki, or, all these kinds of things, how it all weaves together. And so I wanted to bring all of this information in a coalescent way into a meaningful book that could take someone, whether they knew a lot about healing or nothing about healing, and go through a journey of a few pages and bring everybody to a place where they understand what this is really all about and the potential that we have as a human being. And so that's the best way I can describe this book. So the book covers a lot of topics. It talks about energy healing. It talks about why medicine has a hard time with this concept of healing and quantum healing and all this kind of stuff. It talks about our energy system and the bodies and chakras and all the things that are part of our energy matrix. It talks about the ascension and how that ties into the story. It talks about how our energy is capable of healing and what that looks like, and how we have a physical part to that, a psychological part to that, and a spiritual part to that. And then how this opens us up to understand what's happening through this ascension process that we're talking about, where our DNA is opening and the quantum field of information that's part of our DNA system is opening, and that's creating a whole new potential to heal and change that's available to people who kind of pursue that or are interested in that possibility. And so it takes us up to the threshold of quantum healing. But interestingly, the book, I self-published the book about 5 years ago, and I have it available when I speak and do workshops and things, and it's sold like thousands of copies. It's incredible, like how it's kind of really taken off on its own. But it was a self-published book. I never brought it to a publisher or an author. And then just recently, last year, the book was picked up by a publisher in Canada, and they want to publish it in English and also in French as a published title. And so the book is going to be changing its name. It's going to be called Unity Field Healing Volume 1, Foundations of Energy Medicine and Quantum Healing. And it'll be published later in the year, or first thing in 2019 in that new format. And it's also going to be translated into French, which in Canada is fantastic because about 20%, 25% of our population speaks French as a first language. So it's being more accessible, and also to French-speaking people in Europe as well. So it's kind of taken on a little bit of a life of its own, and it's expanding in that way.
What do you mean by the unity field? What is that?
So the unity field healing, the way this work came to me, Gail, was through visionary experiences. And it kind of takes images to really show this properly, but I can kind of give a summary of what I was shown.
And excuse me, was this when you were meditating and conscious, or in a dream state? You were conscious.
In a conscious meditation. And what would happen when I don't have these experiences every day. They kind of happen sporadically. And they happen usually when I'm about to be taught something that's meaningful, not just to me, but to the work I'm doing as well. And so what happened in these experiences, it's literally like my third eye opens. So people have had that experience of, in a meditation where you start to see things in a visionary way, will understand that. But everybody can understand what it is to dream. You know, you see things in your head that you're not seeing with your eyes. And it's kind of like that, but it's happening while I'm conscious in my body at the same time. And so I was shown experiences that talked a little bit about what happens when we incarnate and the energy that we bring from our soul to be part of our reality as a person. And what's happening now is this field of energy, it has always been quantumly linked to our soul. And the energy between us and our higher spiritual nature is expanding. And so people talk about a DNA expansion, or, quantum DNA awakening, or 12 strands of DNA, and so on and so forth. And they're addressing this process.
Excuse me, does the DNA exist on a spiritual template before we're born, or are we talking about DNA that's purely part of this body, physical?
It does exist before you're born. And in fact, you bring with you the bits and pieces that are relevant to a lifetime or an incarnation. So imagine, for example, if you've lived 100,000 times and you've been a man, you've been a woman, you've been a mother, you've been a father, you've been a healer, you've been a teacher, you've been a prostitute, you've been a spiritual person, You've been all kinds of different things. And through the journey of all of that, you've lived so much that you're wise. You have a wisdom about the nature of life that you have from all of these things that you have taught and lived. And you have gifts that you've acquired in those lifetimes. But when you're going to focus your incarnation on a purpose, you're going to be born and you're going to narrow that experience to something that's meaningful to an incarnation. You don't bring all of that with you.
It'd be overwhelming.
It would be, yeah, exactly. So what happens is you come and you are focused. So you bring, say for example, you're going to be a mother and have 2 children, and you're going to be a nurse, and you're going to live in a community with family and souls that you know, part of your soul group, if you will, and you're going to deal with a couple of elements of your own personal karma, things that you may have done in another lifetime that you want to neutralize the energy around. And you have the potential to have some experiences that are going to teach you to be present for other human beings in a public way or as a teacher. You can see the energy you would need to be that person. You'd have to be nurturing as a mother, you would have to be powerful as a teacher, you'd have to be present, and so on and so forth. So as a soul, you'll bring with you those attributes so that they're with you to help walk you through that journey of an incarnation. You also have a quantum connection to the genetics of your parents. So your mother and father, their DNA is the same. When they were born, they brought with them the energy of their own experience too. So that has an influence. There's an overlay of that energy that's part of our reality. And Indigenous people would often express, the sins of a father will affect 7 generations. And there's a quantum way that energy is carried in our genetics so that these things can have an outcome for generations to come. But that's not only true of bad things, it's also true of good things, which is really important to understand.
Yeah.
Because so many people are fundamentally so good and so incredible that they're not just all about problems or karma or bad things, right? So all of this that we carry is kind of souped up. This ascension that we've been talking about, through that things are changing a bit. So what's happening is originally when we were born, we would live out our life, we would have our experiences, and then we would pass on and we would go back to spirit and we would glean the wisdom and, learn from what we did or didn't do while we were born. And we would grow in our spiritual wisdom and in our human wisdom. As we go through the ascension and we open up to this multidimensional part of us, it's contained in what I was shown is like a big quantum DNA molecule or field. And so in this quantum space, every lifetime you've ever lived, that information is there. It's like a library. And so we can go back into that space and bring that information forward into this conscious mind, into the human being that we are today. And so, like I said earlier, when we do that, it's really creating a multidimensional experience. So anybody's had past life memory, that's really what you've done, whether you realized it or not. And so as we open more to this field of information, you can imagine that for example, if you're dealing with an infirmity in your body or an illness of some kind, you have within you the memory of a lifetime where it wasn't like that. You know what it is to be really healthy and happy in your body. So as we do this, people use the term mining the Akash, going into that quantum energy and bringing new possibilities and new potentials forward through the energy of what we're experiencing and seeding it, if you will, or bringing it in a seed form into this lifetime and allowing it to help us to heal or transform in a way that is really beneficial to our overall well-being. And so you see beautiful examples of that all the time. You see people who've gone through experiences and they come out the other side and they're this powerhouse of inspiration and knowledge and wisdom and, and presence, and they help other people believe and heal and move through their experiences
like
too.
Helen Keller is who
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so when I was shown through these visions, part of it was I was shown a template, and it's a light pattern that I call the Unity Field Healing Template. And it looks like a series of eights. It's like figure eights that create spheres within spheres. And what I saw in the meditation was this pattern working inside the quantum field of energy that is our DNA structure. So it was a pattern that was vibrating there, if you will, or working there at that level to recalibrate the DNA. So it led to a system of healing that I was inspired to develop. And originally I did it through audio guided meditations. So people could do session 1, session 2, and session 3. And the first 2 are attunement sessions, where the first session you attune to your own spiritual DNA axis. And it's a really important session because really what it is this self-attunement. You're attuning to your own greater spiritual nature. And then the second session is an attunement to the actual template, the pattern of light that I was shown. And then so you have the ingredients to work with these two things now to do session 3, which is more intentional work. And session 3 can be used by including an intention in the session. And the intention may be something that you want to heal or overcome, or it may be something you want to create. So it's not all about healing, it's about creation. And healing is really creating health. But we can create many things. So healing is kind of like getting over things from the past, but we can also create things for the future. So the session can be used intentionally in both orientations.
And people can download the 3 from your website.
They can, yeah. So there's an audio package, and you can buy them and automatically download them on purchase.
I did.
And when I did, oh, you did? You have the sessions?
I have.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Have you started working with them?
No, but I intend to.
Okay.
It's my
I can't wait to
intention.
hear your feedback. So it's been amazing because people, have done the sessions now for a couple of years, and the stories that people come back and tell me are really, really powerful. And you kind of see how this is. I see it as a tool. People will say to me, John, do you have to do this? Do you need to do this? And I say, no. What's happening is such a natural thing. It's innately happening. But think of it like this. If you broke your leg and you wanted to heal, you could refuse to have a crutch. You could sit for 6 weeks and put very little force on it, and then you could slowly start to use it again, and then you could start to build up the strength of your muscles and allow that healing to happen over the course of about 6 months or a year. Or you can wear a cast and use crutches to support you with your weight. The bone will heal quickly, it'll be stabilized, and in a month you're back on your foot and you're walking and so on and so forth. So the wisdom that would allow us to do that is a tool. So this work to me is a tool. It's to help people understand what they're doing and to create the space, because to do this kind of work, it's an inner work. We have to do it inside, if you will. It's a meditative work. And so the sessions, are done in the audio format, and that's really what they are. They're meditations. They take about 30 minutes, and it's a guided process that kind of takes you on a journey, if you will. And then the energetic changes occur in that process. But last year, I was also led to...
Wait, let me just ask you this.
Yeah.
Would you say that the 3 pieces are kind of like epigenetics, that you're using spiritual intention and attunement to change how the DNA manifests?
Yeah, it is. But to me, epigenetics is more the study of how psychology and social systems affect genetic expression.
Well, this is like a spiritual epigenetics.
Exactly.
Okay.
So it kind of it goes in a little bit of a different orientation, but it's the same principle. Yeah, so you really nailed it there. Spiritual epigenetics. I like that.
So spirit is even without your conscious intention, is realigning our spiritual and physical DNA for a higher purpose.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you said last year you were saying?
Yeah, so like for a couple of years it was available in audio sessions, and lots and lots of people were experiencing the audios and having interesting experiences, but people kept saying to me, when are you going to teach people to do this?
Yeah.
And I kind of thought, well, I don't think I really ever will need to do that. Like, people have the audios, why do we need to have sessions and what have you? But it kept coming to me, and I know when Spirit is sending you a message, it will do that. It'll send 10 people to say the same thing to you over the course of 2 weeks. And so I kind of sat with it, and then all of a sudden I woke up one morning and I knew everything that was part of each session. I knew how to format it. I knew how to teach it. It was like it all came as a download of information. And so I put together, over the course of a month or two, a teaching program, and then started to initiate practitioners to doing the work. So I've taught just 3 classes so far, but there's 54 people now who've been attuned to do the work as practitioners. And so many of the people, are people who've been in healing practices and doing Reiki and these types of things. But the other thing I found quite phenomenal is about 30 or 40% of the people who wanted to do the training have no healing experience.
Hmm.
None. It's like an air traffic controller, a pilot, an engineer, like people from all kinds of different walks of life who wanted to come and learn about this. And I found that really phenomenal, Gail, because I thought the people who'd want to learn to do it are people who would do it as their practice.
Right.
But people came back and said to me, John, since I've done the training, like one lady was a teacher and she taught children in an elementary school. She said, of course, I'm not doing the energy work with kids directly, like I'm not doing sessions or anything, but she said, it's so profoundly affected the way I relate to these children that it shows up in everything I do. And so I began to understand the bigger implications, of what it's really all about. And I realized that we can manifest this energy and consciousness in different ways. We can do it in sessions, but even embodying it and vibrating with it, if you will, is an incredibly powerful thing. And some of the healers who did the training came back and they said, I've been doing Reiki for X number of years, or reflexology, and the moment I lay my hands on the person, I go into this energy space. It affects everything I do. So no matter what I'm doing, I feel this work is becoming part of it. So it's been interesting to have that kind of feedback, because I realize how powerful, I guess, for lack of a better word, it can be.
What you're saying is that you're teaching how to access the quantum-filled light template in order to activate the DNA in a more evolved way.
Yeah.
And so what else do you do in the sessions besides the 3 meditations?
In the unity field work?
Yeah.
So the response, what happens is the energetic response is unique to the intention. So what I find happens is the first 2 sessions are more attunement sessions, like I said. So people will have different experiences with those, but it's the same thing is kind of happening, but it's happening in a very personal way. So the remarkable thing that I've experienced from those sessions is people will see energy for the first time. They'll feel energy in their body for the first time. I've had people who've seen their chakras. I've had people who've experienced Kundalini movements, and so on and so forth. And they had not had these kinds of experiences before they did that. And other people, it's very quiet. They don't have lights and sounds and energy experiences, but they feel a transformation taking place to them that they're very conscious of. And they have their own words and way of saying that. So it's really neat. In the 3rd session, people are working more intentionally. So the way that I think about it is we're doing a pattern of energy, we're doing a system of energy, but because we're changing the intention, the energetic response or the quantum response to the energy mirrors the intention. So although we're doing the same thing, it's not the same thing that's happening for the person. You understand?
Yes, each individual manifests it differently.
Correct. And then it can be very broad-based. So for example, when we put an intention into the 3rd session, we can be very specific about it, or we can be very open about it. So for example, one example I'll often illustrate when I'm talking about it is anxiety. Someone says, I'm just anxious all the time, and I've tried different things. I've tried to meditate. I've used medications. I've used flower essences. I can't get to the root of what this anxiety is all about. And I'll say, well, let's work on that. Let's put that in as an intention. And the person may not understand that the anxiety is really stemming from their own ascension. So as their energy is being stirred in their learning, and they're touching on the memory of other lifetimes where fearful things have happened to them when they opened up spiritually or energetically, there's a reflexive protection in the body. It says, don't do this. It just doesn't go well. Don't bother doing this. It always ends badly. So, there's a beautiful love protection. It's trying to keep you safe, and it creates anxiety within the system, and yet it's impinging now because this is a safe time to have this experience.
Yeah.
So the anxiety is coming from that resistance without the person having so much as a clue as to what really is going on in their energy system. And so the energetic response can kind of clear out some of the emotions and the fear, if you will, that is creating that reflexive anxiety. And so, but you never know to ask for that. You only can touch it at the level at which you're conscious of what you're living. But the response can be multidimensional in the sense it can respond from a plane of existence, if you will, that's more knowing or more comprehensive than what the symptom might be about. And so, I had another lady who was having chest pain, and she went through the session, and she got up and she said, "My gosh, John," she said, "it's like I can breathe in my chest for the first time." And 2 days later, she got a phone call from her sister who she hadn't spoken to in, I don't know, like decades. And they had a falling out, and her sister had, reached out, and she said, "You've been on my mind constantly, and I just want to talk to you." And so they went through a whole process of healing an ancient wound, that even showed up in this lifetime through the form of her sister. And it was part of the healing. So it was like the energetic change took place, but then it was also mirrored by a responsive psychological event. And so, just to kind of give a spectrum, I guess, or an example of a couple of different things that people experience. So as a practitioner, when you're doing the work, you're doing the same process, but the energy that's changing is unique and different each and every time. And I think that's why it's so easy to learn. It's not a complex system of energy management. You're making space for the transformation in the session that you do.
So the shapes that you saw in your visions, that's not something that you created. It's something that you saw that already exists, that is elevating us. So
correct.
You visualized it in a way that people could apply, but it already exists as the unity field.
The way it happened was it came. It literally birthed itself in the vision. So the way that it happened was, as my third eye opened, I was seeing this, what looked like the night sky. It was like a dark blue starlit sky. And a dot of light came down from the top, and it opened up into a pyramid, and it created a pyramid that was like a shell of light. And then down through the pyramid, another dot of light came and formed another pyramid, and it happened a third time. And then through the third pyramid, a dot of light came, it opened into a circle, and then it opened into two smaller circles in the bigger circle, and then the smaller circles developed two circles, and the whole thing became activated, like it was plugged in. And as it did, it was like the energy of the structure. Actually, I have a picture here that, not exactly it, but I can actually show it in the video so people understand.
Good. So it's like a mandala in a way.
Oops. So you can kind of see the pattern.
Yes.
And it opened, and then in another vision a little bit later, Gail, it became active within the DNA structure that I was shown. But people can read about all of that on the website. There's a whole story that talks about how it came into being, and the pictures are there to help people really understand. So it's powerful.
And then you saw a crop circle that was very similar.
I did, yeah.
That must have been a thrill.
Yeah, I did.
So do you
I
think...
realized too, I'm just about to run out of power here, Gail, and I don't have my cord to plug my computer in, so.
Let's see. So do you think quantum physics underlies all this?
I do, all of it. And so quantum physics is really, really powerful. Actually, Gail, if you pause for 1 minute, I'm going to run downstairs and get my cord.
Yay.
Okay.
So you were going to show us a picture?
So we're showing this template. And so you can kind of see here a representation of the template of the structure.
Right.
And the way that it came to me in this vision was the template came as a structure and it introduced itself to me. And that was all that happened in that meditation. And then I lived another meditation where a few months later, where the template came back. and it activated in a brand new way. And when it did this, there was all kinds of light coming out of the template, different kinds of colors and vibrations. And in my body, as the template was doing this in my vision, my body was reacting to the energy. And it was like I was undergoing adjustments or energy experiences. So my limb would flick, or my head would straighten, or I'd need to stretch my chest in a way to let it kink out of my body. And I realized as this was happening, the energy was healing me in some way, or there was an energy change taking place. And at this point in time, I didn't know it was a healing system. I was just having these meditative experiences.
That were like the
And so-
Kundalini experience a bit.
Exactly, yeah. And so I kind of thought, well, maybe this is just for me, like it's something that's part of my journey or whatever. And then I lived another vision, and it was in December of 2012, which is an auspicious date because it goes back to the end times that we talked about earlier. And I was in Arkansas in a conference of about 500 people who were all healers and interested in this kind of information on a big crystal bed, which is Mount Ida. And so in this experience, in this setting, I had another one of these meditative experiences. And what happened was I was shown a crystalline staircase. And I was at the bottom of the staircase, and I thought, gosh, it's like an invitation to go up. But as I tried to walk in the vision, if anybody has ever done shamanic visioning, you can interact with the vision. You can actually have an intentional interaction with what you're seeing. And so my intention was maybe I will go up the stairs to see what's on the other side. And it was like I ran into a glass wall. And I ricocheted so powerfully that I almost tipped back physically in my chair in the room. And I thought, okay, I guess I'm not going to take these stairs by intention or by walking up. But the whole image disappeared and it came back like a screen refresh. And there was a DNA symbol laying on the stairs. And I knew what the vision was trying to say to me was the way you go up in vibration to this next level of reality that you don't see yet is through your DNA. And then this big cosmic DNA came back that I had seen in a couple of other meditations, and I could see this light pattern inside the DNA molecule. And it was moving around. And it was the experience of, I'll often say this in the workshops, you know the commercial where you used to spray the bubbles and they would come out and they would clean your bathroom? the bubbles, you know, they clean your faucet and they clean the tub and they clean the sink and the toilet. And as this little bubble was moving around in this big quantum DNA space, I thought of that commercial. And it was kind of a funny thing to think of, but that's what it looked like because I realized the bubble, it was like it was cleaning up the DNA. And so as it moved around, there were little reactions. There were like explosions of light and different kinds of things going on in the DNA molecule. And I realized I was being shown that the pattern works inside this quantum space of DNA to help recalibrate it or to help it heal or reconnect to the human body. And so that's how it came together cohesively in my mind as a healing template or a healing pattern. And then it was after that that I was led to create the audio sessions and to develop a formula, if you will, or a modality or a system that people could use to work with the energy and the consciousness of what it is.
Is your feeling that this download that you're getting is orchestrated by some intelligent beings, or is it just that you're picking up on a template that exists without it being orchestrated? You're just able to pick it up, or is it being directed?
I think, yeah, I think both. I think what you're saying is true. I think it's part of an overall plan, if you will, or a system of energy that's a natural part of this evolution that we're going through. Personally, I do believe that there's other intelligent life forms in the universe, and they're part of our whole makeup. And they're certainly involved in helping us go through this ascension process in time. And that they're connected to this as well in ways that we don't really necessarily fully understand, but I do believe that's true.
The crop
And
circle seems to be evidence of that. The
yeah,
crop circle being so much like your template.
exactly. And that's, I understood it was a universal pattern. So it's not something that when we look at spiritual things, it's not something we can own or possess. You know, like you can have an idea, and in 3D reality, creators are all about owning and possessing. You know, like you're the first to have an idea, and so on and so forth. But in a spiritual sense, this information is available to people, and people will integrate it and use it in ways that are meaningful through their own consciousness. So it comes to different people in different ways. And so personally, you know, this is how it came to me. It came in a form that I can understand it to this degree, and then turn it into a modality or a healing process, you know, that can be used by other people. And then, of course, a lot of that is on faith at the beginning, because you have all of this experience and teaching, but it's an internal teaching. And you don't know if what you're thinking is legitimate until people start to use it. And then you start to hear about their experiences and you realize, oh my gosh, yeah, that's exactly what is happening. So, you know, there's a whole other level of experience that then is created as you begin to share it. And then, of course, that returns faith, and you realize you were on the mark, and you know, you can take it to the next step, if you will. So.
Um, the geologist Greg Braden is saying that our DNA, maybe 2 millennia ago, I'm not sure, was consciously changed by some higher force so that we could be more intuitive and intelligent. I'm just wondering how this fits in terms of us being kind of led.
Yeah. So what's understood by many people, and Greg Braden speaks of this, so does Lee Carroll in his information that's channeled from an entity called Chiron. They talk about the DNA, and at a time, if we look at our DNA structure, our second chromosome is a chromosome that ends up being twice as big as any other chromosome. And when you look at it structurally, you can appreciate that it's actually 2 chromosomes that were fused into 1 chromosome.
Oh.
So it's believed that we had 24 pairs of chromosomes, and it was made 23 pairs of chromosomes when these 2 chromosomes merged into 1. On the other side of that experience, people believe that this was part of what is called the Pleiadian seeding. So the Pleiadian is a stellar civilization that some people believe in, and they believe that they can be thought of in a way as our parents. So they were instrumental in bringing, you know, the divine element of DNA and consciousness to the earth as it evolved through its own development and beginning. And so the human divinity, if you will, the conscious part of human beings, the divine part of human beings, was woven into the DNA at this time. And people believe it coincides with the period of time when 23 chromosomal pairs were made from 24 pairs.
What does that second chromosome do? What's its function?
So the chromosomes all have different functions. They all carry different genes. And the chromosomes don't tend to do one thing. Like we have the gender chromosome, the XY chromosome, that tends to define physical gender. But even that doesn't define psychological gender, you know, because you still have people who are male who is spiritually or innately within themselves are female by experience, but they carry a male body. And so, you know, each of the different chromosomes will carry genes for various elements of human development, and as well as, you know, disease predispositions and stuff. So the second chromosome is a big one, and it carries lots of genes that affect all parts of the body and the system. But they all do, yeah, they all do that.
But why was the second one especially important?
That I don't know. That's a good question. I'll have to ask that.
I have to meditate on it. Uh-huh. So it sounds like you're hopeful. I mean, as you say, when you read the news and Brazil just elected an autocrat, and Trump and Putin and the Philippines, it just goes on and on. It's hard to be encouraged. So tell me more about why you have hope in the short run.
So I think I think not only do I have hope, it's so important for the message of hope to be spread. What we're living through is a powerful transition from an old energy into a new energy. And what happens when you change something is there's chaos.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to take a system of human consciousness and turn it into a very different type of human experience, everything that's part of the old system that doesn't belong in the new system has to be reintegrated. So if you think about it in another way, the system we're leaving has attributes of human behavior that don't fit well into an ascended model of civilization. So, for example, we can't really be dishonest. We can't think only of ourselves. We have to be more universal in our thinking. We have to be more conscious of our relationship with the planet, with nature, the animals, with each other as human beings, between countries and races, and so on and so forth. And so you can kind of see how we have to go from a system that was based on deep duality and love and fear, light and dark, into a more conscious, unified collective. And so coming from one to the other is not going to happen overnight. It's going to happen through the course of a couple of generations. But when you look at life today and you look at life 2 generations ago, it's already a different world. Like when we look at our culture, yes, we have problems. Yes, there's racism. Yes, there's cultural wars. Yes, there's, commercialism and lack of respect for the planet and all that kind of stuff. But we have never been more conscious of that than we are today. Truly, we haven't. And we're so conscious of it right now that it seems to be all we're ever faced with or get to see or think about. That's how conscious we are becoming on these things. And slowly, people who were already aligned with the change will be ahead of the curve. They'll be frustrated that it's not changing fast enough. People who are attached to the old ideals will slowly open their mind to seeing it differently. And there'll always be a group of people who hold on really tight. It's just the way systems change. It's the way it's been for 100 years, and I'm going to do everything to make it the same.
Right.
But eventually that'll wear thin, and change happens regardless of that resistance. And especially when something has a spiritual impetus behind it. So the earth is being compelled to make this transformation. It really is. And so because of that, slowly the energy that will support it will show itself, and it will reveal the changes taking place. We're in a space right now where we're seeing more of the chaos created by that. And so it's important to not lose sight of the future and the potential that we're growing into, or to become disillusioned that we're not doing that or not creating that. Because then what happens is in your consciousness, you go into that dark space. You go into fighting with the old and giving up and feeling powerless and victimized and all this kind of stuff. And those are energy follows consciousness. So if that's how we pattern our reality, we actually end up inhibiting the evolution because of the way that we're aligning ourselves. So it's important that people understand that. And Buckminster Fuller, he said, you don't change the old by changing the old. You build a better model, and the old will change itself. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but when you understand that, you see the wisdom in that. So a lot of the things that are going to be part of this new matrix of reality and consciousness are very different from what we are leaving behind. And rather than simply just fight with the old, just get really busy creating the new.
That's great. I love that.
Yeah, and it's a place of great love and expandedness. Where you see people suffering, shed faith, shed light, shed hope. Don't become discouraged and keep talking into a negative energy. Just frame it in a different space and everything we do. And we sometimes, people say to me, John, well, what am I supposed to be doing with all this big change? Like, I'm aware of it and I know what you're saying is true. Well, what's my role? What's my job? And I'll say, today it might be to get up and to go down to Starbucks and to make sure the barista has a better day than they started out having. And then you sit down and you have a little conversation with someone at the table, and you leave there them just a little bit happier or better than you found them. And then you go to work and you don't engage in gossip and negativity and beating someone up. And you just kind of pull away from that conversation and create a neutral zone. And so you'll see that you're learning to be in a frame of mind that's different, but you're changing the world one encounter at a time. And you can't look at social media and the news and see that transformation. You don't see it there. It's not newsworthy, you know. So what, I made my barista happy today, or, you know, I made 3 people smile on the sidewalk. That's not going to end up on the news. It's just not going to be there. But those elements of change are the things that really change the fabric of life. So our job individually is to get up each day and simply be the best possible version of ourselves, aligned with the new energy that we can manage to muster. And when we can't, to have compassion and understanding, and to be kind and nurturing with ourselves. This time of beating ourselves up for not being a certain way, or, you know, being this way or not being that way, that all has to stop now. You know, it's time for us to honor who we are as spiritually sovereign beings, and to retake our power to create from consciousness and from a place of balance and well-being.
What do you do for fun to nurture yourself and to give those smiles to yourself?
That's a great question. You know what I've learned is what I do for fun changes. And it changes as I change. There's been some consistencies, you know, like I'm in a relationship and with my partner, and I have a beautiful Great Dane, and I love her to death. And so, you know, a lot of my life and my family, I have, you know, my brothers and sisters and, you know, friends and stuff. And so a lot of my fun really revolves around my experiences with these people. I love to travel. So I can work hard and I can apply myself, but I really love to go on trips and learn new things. And I give myself, you know, time and space to do that, and the freedom to do that. And I don't ever look at it as something that is something more than I really deserve. It's just so important to me that it's going to be part of my reality, and I will make sure that I will do it. I deserve it, if you will. So it's, you know, how I see that. I love learning about energy and consciousness. I love being inspired by other speakers and authors, and I'll attend workshops. And so that's a very rich part of my life. I mean, people might not think sitting in a weekend workshop is fun, but for me it is, because I just love to learn and be exposed. Yeah. And I love to teach. So slowly what happens is your work becomes as joyful as everything else. Like, you know, some of my most favorite things are teaching and being with people in discovering this new consciousness and learning that too. So it kind of becomes woven into your day. It's not something you put aside time for. It just becomes a way of life.
Excellent. Do you know your Myers-Briggs or Enneagram types?
I think I did it a long time ago, probably like 20 years or more. I think I'm INTJ. Yeah.
Sounds right.
Does it? Okay. You would know better than I do.
You've probably changed some of your T, I
My
would
T?
imagine.
Okay.
And
So
your
what
I.
would I do? What would replace a T? A P or
No,
an S?
it goes introverted or extroverted.
Yeah.
And an I is introverted, so you've become more extroverted. And then you're intuitive or sensing,
Okay.
thinking or feeling, likes structure or open-ended. I don't like the word judging because it's not accurate. J or P.
Okay.
But I imagine doing all the spiritual work, you come more into the intuitive and feeling part.
Definitely. And yeah, so it'll be interesting to do it again.
Oh,
See
yes.
what comes up. It may have changed. So.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. Is there anything else that you would like readers of the book to know, or people who watch the video, that we haven't touched on that's like, ooh, we gotta mention this?
I think we kind of covered a lot of that in the last question, Gail, because I think to have a sense of hope and a sense of understanding of what we're living and how important it is, how important each one of us is, how important you are, how important each person is in their own way in this whole process of transformation. the power that each person has to heal and transform. And all it takes is a little understanding and a network of support. And we're well on our way and integrated. And so there's lots of information, like people reading the book. There's my website, unityfieldhealing.com. There's lots of other incredible authors who have amazing books and works that are sharing, so people can intuitively follow their own inner guidance and expose themselves to what they really want to learn. But to allow yourself to stay inspired and to keep reading and learning and experiencing and sharing and to keep moving forward in the new energy and stay in alignment with it. And then when you need support or you need a helping hand, you just have to make sure you have a network around you, whether it's tools you work with or people you share with or a community that you meet with, so that you can really stay aligned and move back into balance when you're feeling out of sorts in different ways. And but not to ever be discouraged or lose hope or be dismayed by what you see around you on the planet. And even days where it's worse, some days are better, some days are worse, but just not to fall in the trap of thinking that's the future. It's actually the past we're leaving behind. It's not the future that's recreating it. So important to get that.
That's hopeful. What kind of books have been especially influential in your spiritual understanding? Anything come to mind?
Yeah, for sure. So things that have been an important part of my own spiritual vision, I guess, if you will. I've always loved the teachings of Jesus, not so much the religious aspect of Jesus, but the true teachings, the words he said, the messages he shared, the presentations he gave, the mysticism in what he talked about and how he was actually teaching us to be quantum 2,000 years ago in the way he spoke and taught. Buddhist teachings have been very powerful to me. I've loved a lot of writings by various monks and the Dalai Lama and people, of this nature. In terms of new information, I've loved the Kryon material, the work by Lee Carroll and the channelings of Kryon. They've been very powerful and helpful for me in my understanding. Gregg Braden's writings, you mentioned him earlier. He's a powerhouse of information. He has incredible information, a wonderful scientist who's doing a lot of research in this field as well. Bruce Lipton, his books are another tremendous resource. There's so many, like I could go on and on and on, but those really stand out. They're really key ones for me personally.
Great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your sharing all this, and I will turn this